The black single dad had just been fired and was walking home. That was what the emergency report had said, right? The medic's shout cracked through the rain as 2 helicopters dropped onto the highway, rotor wash shredding the night. Single dad was fired and walking home. That's what the report said, right? The first medic yelled over the roar. Fine, then where's the doctor? Somebody find the doctor right now. Another medic froze when the girl on the stretcher convulsed, choking for air. Then the man they'd let go an hour earlier stepped out of the darkness with an impossible, almost eerie calm. Because the black janitor they'd just dismissed was the only trauma surgeon within miles. By the way, if you're watching this, tell us in the comments where you're from. Because in moments like this, the world finally notices the people it tried to erase. He didn't argue with the chaos detonating in front of him. He didn't defend himself against the insult that had just echoed across the landing zone. He stood at the wet edge of the road, rain sliding off his shoulders, watching the crisis form exactly where fate had dragged him. He didn't expect anyone to recognize him. Why would they? To the hospital, Elias Ward had been the quiet black man with a mop. To management, he'd been an easy target when something went wrong. To his son Jalen, he was just dad, the one who packed lunches, explained math homework, and tried to keep their small, fragile world steady. Beneath all of that was the part of him he'd buried deep. The trauma surgeon who had once made life or death calls under fire. A black combat doctor who had saved strangers in places no one back here would ever see. He had walked out of the hospital less than an hour earlier, cardboard box of belongings in one hand, Jalen's sticker-covered lunchbox jammed inside. Fired for a mistake he hadn't made, blamed for something his supervisor had ignored. He accepted it quietly for the same reason he'd accepted every hit life threw at him. As a black single dad in his late 30s, he didn't get the luxury of falling apart. His son needed him standing. He'd planned to walk home, heat up leftovers, and pretend today's humiliation didn't sting. Instead, the sky split open with floodlights from 2 helicopters, and the world shoved him right back into the part of himself he'd been running from. He had no badge anymore, no ID, no title, no authority, just instincts that never die in someone who has held too many fading pulses in his hands. He saw it instantly, the girl's airway collapsing, the medic hesitating, the widening horror on the governor's face. He knew the signs, the urgency, the shrinking window. This wasn't the kind of emergency solved with calm voices and textbook steps. This was the kind where seconds bled into the asphalt, where noise drowned logic, where somebody either acted or a child died. His feet moved before his mind caught up. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. His body simply answered a call it understood better than his heart wanted to. He walked toward the barrier where security held back civilians. A guard stepped in front of him, irritated, waving him away with a careless flick. Elias didn't argue. He just leaned enough to see the girl again, her chest barely lifting. Scenes like this were burned into him. Desert heat, improvised tools, soldiers shaking as they begged him to save their friends. He remembered performing procedures no one had trained him for, surviving on grit and instinct, and he remembered the night everything broke. The night he couldn't save the woman he loved most. But tonight wasn't about him. It was about a child with seconds left. He took another step. Rain hit his collar. Sirens wailed somewhere behind him. The governor shouted over the storm, demanding a doctor, any doctor. But the hospital's on-call physician was trapped behind a major accident downtown. The medics here were out of their depth. The girl's airway was closing fast. Every piece of the puzzle snapped together inside Elias. He stepped forward again, ignoring the guard's glare. His breathing slowed, his mind sharpened. His posture shifted, precise, controlled, unmistakably professional. The guard's hand landed on his arm, ready to shove him back. Elias didn't retreat. He didn't yell. He didn't announce his resume. He didn't need to. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had saved lives in worse chaos than this storm-drenched highway. His eyes stayed locked on the girl, the tilt of her head, the strained muscles in her neck, the tremor in the medic's hands. He heard the governor's wife sobbing through the rain, saw fear on the team's faces, the look people get when they know they're beyond what their training covered. Elias knew exactly what procedure she needed. He knew how long she had. He also knew the medic wasn't going to do it in time. Another step. The guard tried to block him again. Elias slipped sideways without breaking focus, sliding past the man's arm with a motion so smooth it startled the guard into hesitation. He wasn't here as the fired janitor. He wasn't here as a man hiding from his own history. He wasn't here for recognition or apologies. He was here because a child's life was being measured in seconds, and he was the only one who understood how quickly those seconds were disappearing. He stepped fully into the storm. For a brief heartbeat, everything paused. The guard's hand, the medic's frozen mid-movement, the governor's voice swallowed by rotor noise. The girl's strangled gasp cut through all of it. Elias moved toward her with the calm of someone who had walked into chaos more times than he wanted to remember. The guard hesitated, confusion flickering across his face, torn between stopping this soaked black man in a worn uniform or getting out of his way. Elias didn't wait for him to choose. He slipped past the outstretched arm, eyes locked on the narrowing airway closing like a fist. The medics recoiled when he reached the stretcher. They didn't recognize him. All they saw was a drenched civilian with no credentials. But the way he stepped in, the weight in his presence, made hesitation feel dangerous. The girl's neck muscles strained. Her lips were edging towards blue. Elias's voice cut through the noise, low but steady. She's got less than 30 seconds before a full obstruction. The lead medic blinked, thrown by the precision. Elias didn't look away. Tilt her slightly, her airways collapsing inward. If you wait for the doctor who's stuck in traffic, she dies. Governor Kessler spun toward them. Rain streaked across his suit, fear hollowing his eyes. "Who are you? Why are you touching her? Back away!" he snapped, then faltered when he saw his own medic glance at Elias, silently asking if this stranger might actually know what to do. Elias didn't answer the governor. He adjusted the girl's head, fingers assessing the weak, erratic pulse at her neck. He'd seen this pattern in the field, trauma swelling, airway blocked, panic pouring gasoline on everything. Dr. Lavinia Clark rushed from the second helicopter, equipment bag half unzipped, breath short. She dropped to her knees beside the stretcher and froze when she saw Elias's hands already positioned with practiced confidence. "Who?" She didn't finish. Something about his posture, his pacing, the cool, unflinching assessment triggered a memory. She'd heard the name Alice Ward before, in briefings and rumors. The missing connection slammed into place. But she had no time to chase it. The girl was seconds from respiratory arrest. The governor barked again, "Somebody remove him!" But even security hesitated. Elias radiated a steady, unnerving calm that didn't match the cheap uniform he'd been wearing an hour earlier. He didn't raise his voice, but every word landed with command. "I need a scalpel, a rigid catheter, and suction. If you don't have suction, give me the smallest tubing you've got and manual pressure. Now." Dr. Clark snapped out of her shock and tore through the disorganized kit with frantic hands. "We're missing half the airway tools," she muttered, panic edging her voice. "We weren't prepared for—" "Then give me what you do have," Elias said quietly, but with so much certainty that it steadied her more than any shouted order. Governor Kessler stepped closer, face pale. "That's my daughter. If you touch her again without telling me who you are, I'll—" Elias finally looked up, meeting the governor's eyes with the weight of a man who had watched fathers lose children in far crueler places than this highway. "Sir," he said, calm but unyielding, "your daughter won't make it to the hospital. You can argue with me, or you can let me save her." It wasn't a plea, it was a fact. The governor froze, caught between fear and disbelief. Dr. Clark shoved the equipment into Elias's hands with a shuddering whisper. "Do it." Elias didn't hesitate. He positioned himself beside the stretcher, fingers moving with a rhythm his muscles remembered even after years of enforced silence. The medics formed an uneven half-circle around him, unsure whether they were watching recklessness or mastery. Elias studied the girl's jawline, watched the swelling, listened to the failing breath. Her trachea was nearly closed. A gust shuddered the helicopter beside them. The night pressed in. Everything condensed into the particular kind of silence only true emergencies carve out. A silence where every breath counts, every heartbeat echoes, and one decision slices the future in half. Elias inhaled once, letting the storm fade to background. He'd done procedures like this in the dark, in sandstorms, under gunfire. This roadside, in comparison, was merciful. Still, this felt heavier than any battlefield. This was a child. Her parents were close enough to see every move. He made the incision with the scalpel Dr. Clark handed him. Precise, clean, controlled. The medics gasped. Elias guided the catheter through the narrow opening just before swelling sealed off the last channel of air. The girl's body jerked, then trembled, then slowly, painfully slowly, pulled in the faintest whisper of breath through the improvised airway. Dr. Clark exhaled so hard her shoulders sagged. "She's oxygenating," one medic whispered. "Holy..." Another medic clapped a hand over his mouth in disbelief. Governor Kessler staggered back a step, watching the impossible unfold in the middle of the rain-slicked road. His daughter's chest lifted again, not much but enough, a stubborn signal that life was clawing its way back. Elias kept working, steadying her breathing with controlled pressure, adjusting angle, stabilizing what fragile airflow he'd created. He didn't bask in the shock around him. He didn't look at the governor or the medics or the guard who'd tried to push him away. His focus stayed on the girl, her pulse, her oxygen, her slow return from the edge. Only when her breathing held did he let himself take a breath. He looked up at Dr. Clark. She was staring at him like someone watching a myth step out of a story. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely loud enough to compete with the storm. He didn't answer. Not yet. "She's stable enough to move," he said instead. "Prep the helicopter. We don't have long." And for the first time since chaos erupted, everyone listened to him. He stood over the stretcher as the medics scrambled to follow his instructions. The girl's breathing stayed faint but rhythmic. The tension around the helicopter shifted from frantic panic to stunned obedience. Dr. Clark moved in lockstep with him, tightening straps, checking lines exactly as he directed. Moments ago, she'd doubted him. Now she mirrored his pace without a single question. "She'll hold," he said quietly, eyes on the rise and fall of the girl's chest. "But we need to move now." Governor Kessler stepped closer, drenched and shaking, staring at Elias as if trying to decode an impossible riddle. Who gave you the right to do this?" he asked, voice cracking, not with arrogance this time, but with fear so sharp it bordered on desperation. Elias didn't flinch. He adjusted the catheter a fraction, coaxing smoother airflow. "Shoot, I took the right," he said, calm and final, "because she didn't have time for anyone else, and because you needed someone who knew what he was doing." The governor's mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but the truth in front of him made words fall away. Dr. Clark stepped in, voice steady but firm. "Governor, he saved her. Without him, your daughter would have gone into full respiratory arrest out there." The governor swallowed hard. He knew she was right, and it terrified him that the man who just saved his child was the same man he'd instinctively dismissed at first glance, a soaked black janitor on the edge of the landing zone. But there was no time to unravel that shock. The rotors began spinning faster, prepping for liftoff. "We're clear for medical lift," the pilot shouted. "If we're going, we go now." Elias checked the girl one last time. The swelling wasn't finished. It would worsen inside the cabin. Every minute still mattered. "Get her inside," he said. "Head elevated. Keep that line stable. Don't change the angle." Dr. Clark nodded, signaling the team. Two medics lifted the stretcher and carried her into the helicopter. Elias stepped back to let them board, but only a step. His eyes never left the patient. The governor stormed toward him again, this time without shouting, just a raw whisper. "How did you know what to do?" "Experience was slight," Elias said simply. "Experience doesn't teach that," the governor pressed. "Not that level, not that calm." Elias kept his gaze on the helicopter interior. It was Dr. Clark who answered. He didn't guess, she said. He performed a textbook airway incision under field conditions that takes advanced surgical training, combat training. Elias shot her a brief look, but she didn't back down. The governor's eyes widened. "You're telling me..." "I'm telling you," she continued, "that whoever he is, he's no janitor." The governor stepped back like the realization had physically hit him. His daughter was alive because of a man whose name he didn't know. A man he'd almost ordered dragged away from the stretcher. Elias didn't stay to hear the rest. He steadied himself on the edge of the helicopter skid long enough to confirm the girl was positioned correctly inside. Dr. Clark glanced at him. "We could use you in the air," she said, hesitant but hopeful. "You being there could stabilize her through the flight." Elias shook his head lightly. "She'll stay stable as long as you don't move the line," he said. "Keep her airway supported and watch for pulse drops during ascent." It wasn't pride that made him refuse. It was the tired refusal of a man who knew exactly what staying too close to this work would cost him. Dr. Clark searched his expression. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his plain, rain-soaked clothes. Something trained, wounded, disciplined, haunted. She wanted to ask more, but her patient needed her. "The pilot's ready," someone yelled. "We have to lift off." She nodded and climbed inside. The medics followed. One secured the stretcher, another prepped oxygen support. Elias stepped away from the door. The governor stared at him, torn between needing answers and fearing them. When this is over," he said, voice trembling, "I want your name." Elias didn't respond. The helicopter rose, beating rain into wild spirals across the asphalt. Its lights sliced through the storm, carrying the girl who'd survived only because fate had put one black single dad on the wrong road at the right time. He watched until it disappeared into the night. Then he finally exhaled. The world around him reassembled, guards barking into radios, bystanders whispering, distant sirens closing in. Elias stood in the softening rain, chest tight, knowing something in him had shifted. He had crossed a line he'd sworn he'd never cross again. And now the world was going to demand answers. He watched the sky until the last blink of the helicopter lights vanished into the clouds. When they were gone, the noise rushed back, radios crackling, officers shouting, strangers whispering about the nameless man who had just saved a life without permission or credentials. He lowered his gaze, raindrops sliding from his hairline, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle on his shoulders. He'd crossed that line tonight, one he'd avoided for 7 long years, and the people around him were buzzing with questions he had no intention of answering. The security guard who'd grabbed him earlier approached again, slower now, guilt written all over his face. "Sir, I didn't know," he muttered. Elias kept walking. He didn't need apologies. Apologies didn't change what he was now, a father trying to survive. A man who'd sworn off the life he'd been shoved back into tonight. "It's fine," he said quietly, though nothing about the night felt fine at all. Rain pooled in shallow puddles as emergency vehicles repositioned. An ambulance that had arrived late idled nearby, medics stepping out and scanning the scene as if trying to piece together what they'd missed. Elias kept moving, hoping to disappear into the dark beyond the floodlights before anyone realized he was still there. But just as he stepped past the edge of the light, a familiar voice cut through the storm. "Stop right there." Governor Kessler approached with heavy steps, suit soaked, tie limp, eyes blazing with a mix of fear, gratitude, and suspicion. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, hands trembling. Elias met his stare with quiet steadiness, bracing for the confrontation he'd hoped to avoid. "You're not leaving," the governor said, voice strained. "Not until I understand who you are." Elias stayed calm. "Your daughter needed help. I gave it. That's all." The governor shook his head, almost offended by how simple that sounded. "That's not all. What you did." His voice cracked, this time with something closer to awe. "I've seen seasoned surgeons panic with less pressure than you had." Elias eased back a step, wanting distance. "You don't need my history to help your daughter. Focus on her. That's what matters." But the governor didn't budge. He stared at Elias like a man staring at a locked door he knew was hiding answers. "You performed a field airway incision like you'd done it 1,000 times, he said softly, "and you walked away like it was nothing." Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't want to explain the years he'd spent in war zones, the nights he'd held dying soldiers who whispered final messages for their mothers and wives. He didn't want to relive the evening he'd lost the only person he'd ever loved more than his son. So he said nothing. Dr. Clark's voice broke the tension. "Governor," she called, hurrying up with rain streaming down her forehead. "We need to move inside. Reporters are already gathering." Elias closed his eyes for half a second. Reporters were the last thing he needed. The governor glanced towards the flashing lights beyond the barricades where cameras were already lifting. Then he looked back at Elias, gaze sharper. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Elias didn't argue, not because he feared the governor, but because disappearing now would only make things worse. Tonight wasn't a night for loose ends. They walked toward a side entrance together. An odd pair. The most powerful man in the state and the soaked, silent black single father who had just rewritten his family's fate. Inside, the corridor buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses hurrying past with clipboards, techs pushing equipment carts, security tightening access to the trauma wing. Elias stayed one step behind, blending into the background, even as the air around him made blending impossible. Dr. Clark walked on his other side, studying him with careful eyes as though trying to match him to every rumor she'd heard about brilliant surgeons who vanished after tragedy. They stopped in a small operations room just off the trauma bay. The governor closed the door, muting the storm outside. Elias stayed near the wall, hands resting calmly at his sides. "Tell me your name," the governor said. Elias didn't move. "Names don't matter tonight." "They do," the governor replied, "when my daughter is alive because of one." Dr. Clark folded her arms. "Governor, I think you already suspect his background." The governor flicked his eyes toward her. "I suspect a lot of things. None of them make sense. What he did out there," she said, "only a trauma surgeon with extensive combat experience could pull off. Not just any surgeon, a specialist trained for hostile environments." Elias felt her words pressing toward a confession he wasn't ready to give. "Combat," the governor repeated quietly. "So you are—" "What I was," Elias cut in gently, "doesn't matter. What matters is whether she survives the next hour." The governor stared at him, chest rising and falling, searching for answers Elias refused to reveal. After a long beat, the governor nodded once. "When this is over," he said, voice low, "I'll find out who you are." Elias knew he would. He also knew this crisis wasn't even close to finished. His part in it was just beginning. He held the governor's gaze for a moment, then looked toward the trauma bay doors where red lights pulsed above the glass. Whatever answers the governor wanted would have to wait. The girl's life was still balanced on a razor's edge. Through the window, Elias saw her oxygen saturation dip again during transfer. The swelling wasn't done. He knew that pattern too well. He also knew that if the trauma team didn't make the next move correctly, everything he'd done on the road would unravel. The governor followed his eyes and saw the numbers slipping. Fear flashed across his face. "They know what they're doing, right?" he asked. Elias didn't respond right away. His silence said more than any reassurance could. Dr. Clark stepped closer, voice low. "The airway you created is holding, but she needs a secondary intervention, fast. I warned the trauma lead, but they're rattled. They didn't expect it to be this advanced." Tension coiled in Elias's shoulders. Knowledge alone was never enough. Sometimes the only thing between life and loss was someone willing to act. Again, he didn't want to step back into that role. Not here. Not in the same kind of halls that had already taken so much from him. Not in the life he'd sworn to leave behind for Jalen's sake. But when Sasha's vitals flickered again on the monitor, something in him broke through his hesitations. "You see something wrong," the governor said. It wasn't a question. Elias stayed quiet, but Dr. Clark answered. "The swelling is accelerating. If they delay, her airway could collapse again." The governor's face crumpled into raw panic. "Then go in, both of you, now." Elias shook his head. "If I walk in uninvited, the team will freeze or fight me. That wastes time she doesn't have." The governor didn't accept that. He strode toward the trauma bay and shoved the doors open. Elias exchanged a quick look with Dr. Clark, then followed. Inside, the room swirled with organized chaos. Monitors chimed, nurses passed instruments. The trauma lead tried to sound steady as he gave orders. But Elias saw the truth. Tremor in the lead's hand, hesitation before each instruction, the quiet panic they were trying to hide. "Stop!" the governor shouted. "Stop all of this!" The room froze mid-motion. The trauma lead turned, jaw tight. "Governor, you can't interrupt a critical procedure." "Then explain why my daughter's vitals dropped again," the governor snapped. "Explain why you haven't stabilized her airway. Explain why the only reason she's even breathing is because of a man you tried to treat like a bystander." Silence crashed down. Every eye turned to Elias. This was exactly what he didn't want: attention, expectation, authority. He still didn't move. He didn't want to shame the team or ignite open conflict. But when Sasha's monitors dipped again, the room shifted into the kind of fear he could not ignore. The trauma lad hesitated, then swallowed hard. If you know something we don't, step in. They didn't say his name. They didn't ask who he was. They just stepped aside, leaving him a clear path. Elias approached with that same quiet precision that had carried him through 1,000 battlefield operations. He checked the incision he'd made earlier, gauging the swelling. It was rising dangerously fast. She needs temporary airway support and prep for formal intubation, he said softly. But if you try to intubate now, you'll tear the tissue. You have to decompress first. The trauma lead frowned. How do you... I've seen this exact progression, Elias said. Too many times. Dr. Clark moved beside him. He's right. We need decompression before anything else. The trauma lead hesitated. He was skilled, but this wasn't his usual world. This wasn't a neat operating room. This was improvisation under pressure. A battlefield disguised as a hospital. Elias guided each step with calm clarity, performing a maneuver that required both steady hands and the ability to predict the next few minutes of swelling. With Dr. Clark assisting, they relieved the pressure and bought enough time for safe intubation. The monitor numbers climbed, one point, then another, then another. Sasha's chest rose in a smooth, stable rhythm for the first time since she'd hit the helicopter. The room exhaled as one. The trauma lead stared at Elias with a mixture of gratitude and stunned disbelief. "Who trained you?" he whispered. Elias didn't answer. He stepped back, letting the trauma team take over and complete the intubation. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't want it. He'd done enough. But the governor had seen everything. The confidence in Elias's movements, the precision no ordinary doctor carried, the steadiness forged in places most people never came back from. Somewhere between fear and awe, he understood. This man wasn't hiding because he lacked ability. He was hiding because ability had cost him something enormous. As the team secured the airway, the governor turned toward Elias, voice breaking. "I need to know who you are. You didn't just save her once, you saved her twice." Elias looked down. The name he carried wasn't just a title, it was a wound. The formal intubation went smoothly. Sasha's vitals stabilized. The trauma-led murmured orders. Nurses moved with renewed confidence, and Dr. Clark stayed close, glancing toward Elias every few seconds as if to confirm he hadn't vanished. The governor stepped nearer, voice softer now. "Oh, you're not going to tell me, are you?" Elias gave the faintest shake of his head, not defiant, just exhausted. He didn't owe his past to anyone, but he also knew silence wouldn't last. Staff were already whispering. People had seen his hands, his composure, his results. Stories would spread. They always did. The trauma-led approached, careful. "You stopped us from making a fatal mistake," he said quietly. "Thank you." Elias dipped his head in the smallest nod. Praise didn't sit well with him, not after years of running from the work that had once consumed him. A nurse signaled that Sasha was ready for transfer to the pediatric ICU. The team began moving quickly. Elias stepped back as the gurney rolled past, the governor following with red-rimmed eyes caught between terror and hope. Soon the room emptied until only Elias and Dr. Clark remained. She walked over, arms folded. "There aren't many surgeons alive who can do what you just did," she said softly, "and none who can do it after whatever you've been through." He met her gaze. There was no judgment there, just understanding, maybe even compassion. "I didn't come here to be found," he said quietly. "I was just walking home." "And yet," she replied, "you walked right into a crisis like you'd been waiting for it." He didn't answer. She stepped a little closer, her voice dropping. "I know your face. I've seen it in old military medical briefings." Her eyes narrowed. "You were in Kandahar, weren't you? Forward Base Bravo." Elias's breath caught. He hadn't heard that name aloud in years. Memories detonated. Tents, dust, sirens, soldiers screaming for help while he tried to be everywhere at once. He looked away. "They said you disappeared after a personal loss," she continued. "That you walked away from the field completely. No one knew where you went." Her tone was careful, respectful. "Some wounds don't heal," Elias said. "Some scars stay inside." Her expression softened. And yet you're still capable of saving a life under pressure most people would crumble in. Capable, he said, doesn't mean willing. Before she could answer, the trauma lead reappeared, clipboard in hand. We need your identity for the chart, he said, hesitant. We can't record this as an anonymous civilian intervention. It'll trigger an investigation. Elias rubbed the bridge of his nose. List it as a field-assisted emergency under duress, he said. Anonymous intervention. The trauma lead blinked. That's unusual. It's accurate, Elias replied quietly. Dr. Clark stepped in. Give him time. There's more going on here than a protocol form. The trauma lead nodded reluctantly and left. Silence settled between them again, the kind that appears when two people understand the deeper cost of what just happened. Elias moved toward the door, ready to slip away before the governor came back with more questions. But when he stepped into the hallway and looked down toward the lobby, his stomach tightened. Reporters had multiplied, news vans lined the curb, metal barricades bowed under the push of people, cameras flashed against the glass like lightning. The governor was already speaking to them, voice raw, not polished. Not a politician in front of microphones, but a father who had nearly lost his child. He saved her, the governor was saying. A man we don't know. A man who showed up at the exact second we needed a miracle. Elias stiffened as the governor kept going. When I find him, when I learn who he is, he'll have my gratitude, my protection, and my full support. This state owes him more than we can say. Elias stepped back into the shadows. He knew this pattern: public recognition, attention, interviews. People clawing at a past he'd spent years burying so Jalen could have a quiet life. The crisis wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. And now the world wanted a name he wasn't ready to give. He stayed in the dim alcove beside an equipment room, the governor's words echoing down the corridor like a warning. Reporters leaned against the barricades, cameras flashing, excitement rising with every sentence. Attention was coming like a flood, and once people started digging, they'd find more than a miracle on a highway. They'd find the night he lost his wife, the reason he'd walked away from the operating table, the reason he'd chosen a mop over a scalpel and late shifts over headlines. Before he could disappear down the side stairs, a nurse hurried toward him, out of breath. "You... wait," she called. Elias froze. She lowered her voice. "The governor keeps asking where you went. Security sweeping the floor." "Tell them I left," he said. "They won't buy that," she said. "Not with what he's telling the press. He's calling you a miracle." The word made his chest tighten. He nodded once in thanks and slipped into the stairwell. The heavy door shut behind him, muffling the reporters' voices. He took the steps 2 at a time, reaching the 3rd-floor landing where the pediatric wing connected to a service corridor. From here, he could exit without passing any public area. But when he cracked the service door open, he saw Governor Kessler at the far end of the hallway. Alone for once, shoulders dropped, tie loose, hands clasped as if he were holding himself together. Elias almost backed away, but the governor lifted his head, sensing movement. Their eyes met. "Don't run," the governor said quietly. No order, just a plea. Reluctantly, Elias stepped into the hall and let the door close behind him. The governor walked toward him, exhaustion etched deep into his face. "I meant what I said down there," he said. "I owe you more than I can repay." "I didn't do it for repayment," Elias replied. "I know," the governor said. "That's exactly why I need to understand who you are." Elias looked away, jaw tight. "The press is calling you the Phantom Doctor," the governor said with a humorless breath. "They think you're some anonymous hero with skills nobody can trace." Elias stayed silent. "But I don't believe in phantoms," the governor went on. "I believe in men who've suffered so deeply they disappear." That landed. Elias didn't show it, but the faint tightening of his shoulders didn't escape the governor. "You vanished once," the governor said. "You're trying to vanish again, but you can't outrun what you did tonight. You saved my daughter twice. The world is going to try to find you whether you want it or not." Elias exhaled slowly. "Your daughter is stable. That's what matters." "Yes," the governor said, "and I want the man who saved her to have protection, not scrutiny, protection." The word made Elias frown. Protection wasn't something he expected from power. The governor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever happened to you, whatever made you leave medicine, It must have been devastating. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. If the wrong people start digging into your past, it could hurt you and your son, the governor said. Let me help. Elias's whole body stilled. Leave my son out of this. The governor raised his hands. I meant what I said. I want to help, not harm. You saved my family. Let me protect yours. The sincerity unsettled him. He'd expected confrontation, suspicion, blame, not this. Not a father clinging to gratitude like a lifeline. Dr. Clark appeared at the far end of the hallway, walking quickly. Governor, she called. The ICU team wants to update you. Is she stable? He asked. Yes, Dr. Clark said. Your daughter is doing better than any of us expected. Relief washed over his face so hard he almost folded. He closed his eyes, then looked back at Elias. I won't force the truth out of you, he said. Not tonight. But I am going to find a way to repay what you did. Elias didn't answer. He wasn't sure there was any repayment for what his life had already cost him. The governor stepped back. Wherever you go, he said quietly, understand this. I don't see the man who was fired. I see the man who saved my kid when no one else could. He walked away with Dr. Clark towards the ICU. Elias stayed where he was, alone but no longer invisible. His anonymity was cracking. His past was knocking. And the crisis that had dragged him back into medicine wasn't done with him. He leaned against this wall, letting the fluorescent hum settle around him. Somewhere above all of this, Jalen was probably asleep at home, unaware that by morning, everything about their quiet routine might change. He pushed off the wall and headed toward the back stairwell, hoping to slip out a staff exit before anyone stopped him again. But as he reached the stairwell, Dr. Clark stepped out of a side room, blocking his path with a determined look. Figured you'd try to disappear, she said. I need to go home, he replied. I know, she said gently, but not yet. The ICU lead is asking for you. They don't need me anymore, Elias said. They've got it. They can continue because of you, she replied, but that's not why they're asking. She studied his face. It's her father. He wants you updated on her condition. Privately. Elias stiffened. He didn't want another confrontation, another round of gratitude, or a deeper tie between their lives. I don't need updates, he murmured. I already know what her next few hours look like. But he doesn't, Dr. Clark said. Inside him, reluctance warred with something else. Responsibility, maybe. He knew what the next 6 hours meant, the risks, the thresholds. Walking away now wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about leaving a family teetering between fear and hope when he knew exactly what that felt like. After a long pause, he nodded. They walked together toward the pediatric ICU. The noise softened as they climbed, the chaos of the lower floors fading into the quiet hum of monitors and soft voices. When they stepped into the ICU wing, Elias saw the governor standing beside a glass-walled room, posture rigid, hands clasped tight. He looked smaller here, less like a leader and more like a father begging the universe for mercy. He turned at their footsteps, relief flickering across his face. She's breathing steadily, he said. The team says she's stabilizing faster than expected. Elias studied the monitors through the glass. Sasha's oxygen saturation had improved. Her color was better. Her body was fighting and winning. She's responding well, he confirmed. The next 6 hours are important. After that, her odds go way up. The governor nodded slowly. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to, Alia said. But I do, the governor insisted, stepping closer. I don't want this to become another story where a man saves a life and disappears like it never happened. Some stories are supposed to stay quiet, Elias replied quietly. Not this one, the governor said. Not when it's my family. Dr. Clark watched him carefully. She could see Elias retreating the way people do when recognition feels like reopening a wound. He's not asking for praise, she said softly to the governor. He's asking for space. The governor wasn't quite ready to release it. At least tell me your son is safe, he said suddenly. Elias froze. I'm not threatening you, the governor said quickly. I just want to know you're not doing all this alone. My son is fine, Elias said, voice quieter now. He's the reason I'm trying to leave before this turns into something it shouldn't. The governor exhaled, realization sinking in. Elias wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting Jalen. Before either of them could say more, a nurse approached with a tablet. Governor, the press is demanding another comment. They're asking for more details about the man who intervened. Elias tensed. Tell them nothing, the governor said. Not until I talk to him. The nurse nodded and left. I meant what I said earlier, the governor told Elias. I want to repay what you did, but I won't drag your name into this without your say-so. Elias studied him, weighing the sincerity. The governor wasn't perfect, but tonight he wasn't speaking as a politician. He was speaking as a father on the edge. You keep her safe, Elias said quietly. That's repayment enough. It's not, the governor said, but it's a start. Dr. Clark touched Elias's arm lightly. There's one more thing. The ICU team needs you to sign the intervention documentation. They can't release updates without a physician identifier. His shoulders tightened. The paper trail he'd been dodging all night was waiting for him. Where's the paperwork? He asked. Dr. Clark exhaled in relief and led him to the ICU desk. The clerk straightened when they approached and slid a stack of forms toward him. Elias stared at the pages, ink and boxes and spaces waiting for a name he'd buried. Dr. Clark stepped back, giving him room. They just need a physician ID, she said softly. Just a signature. He reached for the pen. His hand hovered for a heartbeat. He hadn't signed anything medical in 7 years. Memories flashed like quick cuts. War tents, hospital corridors, alarms, and the night everything fell apart. The night he lost his wife. The night he decided Jalen needed a father more than the world needed a surgeon. He forced his breath steady and signed. The name looked strange to him, not unfamiliar, just like it belonged to a different life. He pushed the forms back. The clerk glanced down, eyes widening. We'll update the system immediately, Dr. Ward. He flinched at the title. Dr. Clark noticed. You just helped save a child, she said. Don't apologize for being who you are. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. The governor appeared again just as the clerk hurried away with the forms. His steps were slower now, worn down by fear and exhaustion. I was coming to find you, he said. I thought you were with your daughter, Elias said. I was, the governor replied. She's asleep. The team says tonight was the turning point. His voice broke. Because of you. The team saved her, Elias said. I stabilized her. That's all. That's not all, the governor said. I've been standing by her bed, watching her breathe, because you refused to let her die on a road in the rain. He stepped closer, words steady. And I need you to understand, what you did changed everything. Elias stayed quiet. He just signed the documentation, Dr. Clark told the governor. The hospital now lists him as the primary field surgeon who intervened. The governor let out a long breath, half gratitude, half dread. Then the press will want his name even more. Elias tensed. He thought of Jalen, of privacy, of their tiny apartment and quiet mornings. I don't want my son on camera, he said. I don't want attention. I don't want any of this touching him. I promised I'd protect that, the governor said. And I will. How? Elias asked. By taking control before the reporters do, the governor said. If I handle the story, we shape what they see and what they never see. You stay unnamed, a private hero, a protected identity. Elias didn't trust easily, but the governor's tone carried something more than politics. Fear, gratitude, and the desperate resolve of a father who owed a debt he couldn't pay back. Before Elias could answer, the ICU doors swung open and a nurse rushed over. Governor, your daughter's waking up. His breath hitched. He didn't waste a word. He ran. Dr. Clark motioned for Elias to follow. You should be there. She'll remember your voice. He hesitated, then went. They entered the room quietly. Sasha lay under soft lights, pale but alive, blinking as her father reached for her hand. Sweetheart, he whispered, brushing her hair. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, then snagged on Elias standing near the door. Her brows pulled together. You, she rasped around the oxygen support. I remember your voice. Elias stepped closer, movements gentle, non-intrusive. You're safe now, he said softly. They're taking good care of you. The governor watched, something shifting in his expression. Not just gratitude, but understanding. When Sasha drifted back to sleep, he motioned Elias and Dr. Clark into the hallway. You didn't just save her life, the governor said. You anchored this place when everything fell apart. He paused. And you anchored me. Elias didn't know how to hold that. Dr. Clark spoke next. There's something you both need to know, she said. Word spreading among staff. People are asking who he is. Some are already digging in the archives. They'll find you eventually, she told Elias. He felt the ache in his chest. That familiar warning that his past was rising whether he wanted it or not. The governor stepped closer. Then let me stand between you and whatever comes. Let me repay what you did. Elias didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He looked at Sasha sleeping peacefully, then down the hallway toward the exit, where reporters waited for a name. The crisis had nudged his life in a direction he had never intended, and he could feel another collision coming. He stood in the ICU hallway, the governor's offer echoing in his mind. Protection, support, repayment. Nice words, dangerous words. He knew what came with attention. Questions, exposure, people digging until they hit the worst night of his life. The governor stepped closer again. You're not alone in this, he said. Whatever comes next, media, hospital, politics, all of it, let me carry the weight. Elias didn't answer. His silence wasn't rejection, it was calculation. He glanced at Sasha, alive because he had acted. He thought of Jalen, safe for now, because he had stayed hidden. There's something else, Dr. Clark said. You both need to see this. She led them to a staff lounge with a wide window overlooking the front of the hospital. The sight made Elias's stomach knot. Reporters packed the sidewalk, news vans jammed the curb, barricades strained. Cameras flashed against the glass like tiny explosions. They're already calling it the highway miracle, the governor said grimly. And the hospital is panicking, Dr. Clark added. Her radio crackled. Administration asking about liability, demanding details about the unidentified medical intervener. She clicked it off with a tight sigh. They're afraid someone will sue them for not having a trauma doctor ready, she said. Once your daughter's story hits the air, they'll try to control the spin. They'll want to protect themselves, Elias said. Exactly, Dr. Clark replied. And they'll do it by either claiming you or distancing themselves from you. Elias stared at the floor. He had no desire to be either their hero or their scapegoat. Then we don't let them set the narrative, the governor said. He looked straight at Elias. Come with me to the briefing, not on stage, just in the room. I need someone who knows what actually happened. Elias didn't want it. But he also knew what happened when institutions rewrote reality. He followed them to the administrative floor. Outside the boardroom, voices clashed. Executives, legal, PR. When the governor stepped in, the room snapped quiet. Governor Kessler, the hospital director began with a rehearsed smile. We're finalizing the official statement for the press regarding tonight's events. Given your daughter's condition, we thought it best if... You had no trauma doctor on scene, the governor cut in, and a man you fired saved her life. Heads turned toward Elias. The director blinked. This individual, this man, the governor said sharply, is the only reason my daughter is alive. A PR manager leaned forward. Sir, we just need clarity for the media. Who performed the procedure? Was it authorized? Do we list him as staff? Elias stepped closer, voice quiet but unshakable. List what happened exactly as it happened, he said. A child was dying, your people froze, and I intervened because time doesn't care about your policies. The director stiffened. That intervention puts us in a complicated legal position. Legally, the governor said, palm slamming the table, he did your job. The room jolted. I'm not here to be praised or blamed, Elias said. I'm here to make sure your statement doesn't lie. Dr. Clark slipped in behind them. I'll verify everything, she said, and I'll testify if I have to. Executives exchanged uneasy looks. Their neat narrative was collapsing. The governor leaned in. I'll tell the press myself if I have to, but this statement will honor the truth. Silence, then a stiff nod from the director. We'll revise. As they stepped back into the hallway, Dr. Clark exhaled. That was a fight. The real one starts when the cameras turn on, Elias said. The governor nodded. You won't be standing in it alone. Elias didn't answer. He still wasn't sure whether walking into the light was safer than hiding in the shadows. They didn't get far before an alarm shrieked down the hallway. Dr. Clark was already running. Ped's alarm, not her room, but let's go. They rushed into the ICU as nurses converged on room 307. A small boy lay convulsing in the bed, staff scrambling. Dr. Clark took command, snapping orders, securing his airway, pushing meds. Elias watched, ready, but he didn't step in. Not this time. She had it. Within minutes, the boy's breathing eased. The team sagged with relief. "You handled that," Ilya said when she stepped back. She gave a tired smile. "Not my first pediatric emergency." The governor, still rattled, looked between them and Sasha's room. Seeing that, it reminds me how thin the line is. He looked at Elias. "Why did you leave medicine?" The question hit deeper than anything else tonight. "My wife died during a trauma shift," Elias said quietly. "Complications no one predicted. I couldn't walk those halls anymore. And my son, he was 6. I had to decide if I'd be a doctor drowning in grief or a father who stayed present." The governor's face softened. "And your son?" he asked. "He's why I took the janitor job," Elias said. "Why I kept my head down. Why I walked away from being Dr. Ward. He needed a dad who came home." Silence wrapped around them. Not empty, full. "You may have walked away from medicine," the governor said, "but medicine never left you. Tonight proved that." Elias looked at Sasha through the glass, stable and alive. Saving her hurt, he admitted, but it also felt right. Dr. Clark nodded. "You don't have to decide your whole future tonight, but you do have to protect the life you've already built. The press briefing starts in 20 minutes. He inhaled slowly. He wasn't a phantom anymore. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the fired black single dad walking home in the rain. He was the man the world was about to see, if only in silhouette. And this time he chose not to run. He stood outside the ICU, hallway hushed. 20 minutes. That was all the time before everything tilted again. "I'll go with you," he said finally, "but I don't want my name spoken, not hinted." "I gave you my word," the governor said. "And if it gets messy?" Elias asked. "Then I take the hit," the governor replied. "Not you." Something settled in Elias at that. He wasn't used to anyone standing between him and danger. Not since before the war. Dr. Clark handed him a plain surgical jacket. "Wear this," she said. "It'll make you blend in with staff. Less for cameras to grab onto." He slipped it on. The fabric felt too familiar. Not all the memories were painful. Some were full of purpose. They rode the elevator down together. By the time they reached the lobby, they could already hear the roar. Voices, shutters, the restless buzz of unanswered questions. Security opened a staff side door. The governor stepped out first. Elias followed, head slightly down, posture steady. Lights hit them immediately, bright, merciless. Cameras swung towards the governor. Microphones surged forward. Elias stayed behind him, partly shielded by Dr. Clark. The governor raised a hand and the noise settled enough for his voice. "Tonight my daughter survived a medical emergency that should have taken her life," he began, voice steady but raw. "She was trapped in minutes no child should ever face, minutes where hesitation becomes fatal." The room quieted. "A man stepped forward," he continued, "a man who owed us nothing. A black single father who was walking home after losing his job. He saw a child in danger and did not hesitate." A stir moved through the crowd. "Sia." He stabilized her airway when there was no time to reach a hospital. He kept her alive long enough for specialists to take over. He did it without asking for a name, recognition, or reward. Questions exploded. "Who is he? Is he a doctor? Is he here right now?" The governor lifted his hand again. "He is here," he said, "but he will stay anonymous by his own choice. This briefing is not to expose him. It is to honor him." Some reporters frowned, frustrated. Others leaned in. "I will not answer questions about his identity," the governor said. "What I will say is this. He saved my child when the system around her faltered. And I want everyone watching to remember something. Heroes don't always wear badges or titles. Sometimes they're walking home in the rain, unseen, and still willing to act." The lobby fell into a softer silence. Dr. Clark leaned toward Elias. "You don't have to move," she whispered. "He's covering you perfectly." But something inside Elias shifted. He lifted his head just enough to be seen beside the governor. A shadow, a shape, a presence, not a clear face. Just proof that someone stood there. A ripple went through the crowd. Not recognition, acknowledgement. "So, he stands with me tonight," the governor said, voice thickening, "to confirm one thing. That every life is worth fighting for, whether the world is watching or not." Reporters stepped forward again, but no one pushed past the line the governor had drawn. And for the first time that night, Elias felt some of the pressure ease. He wasn't being dragged under a spotlight. He was choosing how much light touched him. The briefing wound down. Security guided them back toward all the staff doors. Once the lobby doors shut behind them, Dr. Clark let out a deep breath. "You handled that with more composure than half the doctors I know." "Composure's easier," Elias said, giving a faint, tired smile, "when you're not the one talking." The governor turned to him. "I'll make sure the truth is told without putting a camera in your son's face," he said. "And if you ever need anything, you come to me." Elias nodded, not from obligation, from respect earned in a storm. They went back up to the ICU one last time. Sasha slept peacefully, the room glowing softly around her. Elias stood near the door, letting the sight settle something inside him. He had saved a life. He had walked straight into the past he feared and hadn't broken. He had protected his son's future for now, and he had stepped back into the world he'd fled without losing himself. If you're still here following this journey, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because what happened on that highway was only the beginning of the storm, waiting for Dr. Elias Ward and his son.